The clock on the wall of the East Wing bedroom read 11:47 when the glass hit the floor. Not by accident. Hana stood over the bedside table, her fingers still extended from the sweep that had sent Zara's medication shattering across the marble. She looked down at the mess. Then she looked at the woman lying in the bed. Zara was still, her skin damp with fever, her breathing slow and heavy with illness. Hana studied her for a long moment, the way a person studies something they have already decided to discard. Then Hana turned and walked out without picking up a single piece. Downstairs, laughter moved through the corridors of the Park estate like smoke, low voices, careful, deliberate words. A meeting was taking place in the part of the house where the staff had been sent home early and the corridor cameras had been turned to face the walls. In the corridor outside the sitting room, pressed between the heavy weight of a curtain and the cold stone of the house wall, a man stood completely still. He had come home early tonight. Something had pulled him back, some instinct he stopped questioning years ago because it had never once been wrong. He had been standing in this exact spot for 7 minutes, and he had not moved. His name was Kai. He ran the most feared criminal organization in all of Seoul. And right now, holding a glass of whiskey he had completely forgotten was in his hand, he was listening to his own family discuss the removal of the woman he loved. Every single word. Upstairs, in the bedroom Hana had just left, a pair of dark eyes opened in the darkness. Zara was burning with fever, her body was exhausted, but her eyes, wide open in that room, were the sharpest and clearest eyes in the entire building. Her hand moved slowly beneath the edge of the mattress. Her fingers found what they were looking for, and something that was almost a smile crossed her face. Whatever this family thought they were building tonight, they had made one catastrophic mistake. They had forgotten that sick and defeated are two very different things. The city of Seoul does not forgive weakness. It never has. It was built by men who understood that the distance between survival and destruction is measured in seconds, in decisions, in the speed with which a man can read a room and act before the room reads him first. Kai had understood this before he was old enough to name it. By the time he was 24, he had inherited the remnants of his father's organization and built it into something that made the most dangerous men in the city cross the street when they heard his name coming. His real name is known to very few people alive. To the rest of Seoul's underworld, he is referred to by reputation alone. The man who restructured 3 competing criminal syndicates within 18 months. The man who settled a territorial war that had been running for a decade with a single meeting lasting 40 minutes. The man who does not raise his voice because he has never needed to. He had a penthouse in the city center. He had an estate in the hills that his father built and his mother occupied like an empress in permanent residence. He had 3 floors of offices in a building registered to a consulting firm that conducted no consultancy, and somewhere inside all of that, tucked into what should have been an impossible life, he had Zara. Nobody who knew Kai before Zara would have predicted her, not because she was unexpected in her beauty, though she was extraordinary. Not because she was unexpected in her intelligence, though that was something else entirely, but because Kai was a man who had closed off the part of himself that responds to human warmth with such thoroughness that most people who dealt with him professionally were not entirely certain he possessed it. Then he met Zara at a charity event on the south side of the city. She had been standing near a window, alone, watching the rest of the room with the particular stillness of someone who is completely comfortable inside their own observation. Most people at events like that perform. They perform their laughter, their interest, their position. Zara was simply watching. And something about that pulled Kai across the entire room without his conscious permission. He asked her what she was thinking about, not who she was. Not what she did, what she was thinking about. She looked at him for a moment in the way she had of looking at things, fully and without performance, and told him she was thinking about the difference between rooms where people come to be seen and rooms where people come to be known, whether any room could manage to be both at once. He did not have an answer for her that night. He thought about the question for the next 3 days. He called the mutual acquaintance. He got her number. He called her and they talked for 2 hours. He called again the next evening. 3 months later, she moved into the estate. Before we go any further, I have to ask, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. He never told his mother in advance. He simply arrived one evening with Zara beside him and the announcement carried in the set of his jaw. Myung sat across the dinner table that first night with a smile so perfectly placed it could have been painted there. She addressed Zara with the graciousness of a woman who had long practiced hiding what she actually thought behind the performance of what was expected. She poured tea, she asked questions, she laughed at small things. She was, by every observable measure, welcoming, and Zara, who had spent her entire life learning to read rooms the way musicians read music, heard every note the woman was not playing. The family accepted the marriage the way powerful families accept inconvenient things. Publicly, with grace. Privately, with strategy. Soo shook Kai's hand at the small private ceremony and smiled the smile of a man absorbing a blow in public while calculating the response he will deliver in private later. Hana kissed Zara's cheek and whispered something warm and completely hollow that Zara did not bother to remember past the hour it was delivered. For 2 years, the estate maintained a surface of function. Kai was present when the demands of his organization allowed, which was not as often as either of them pretended to be comfortable with. Zara occupied the estate with the kind of composed dignity that is its own form of resistance. She did not beg for acceptance. She did not perform gratitude for being tolerated. She existed in that house as fully and precisely as she existed anywhere else. It drove Hana to a particular kind of madness that expressed itself as small, sustained hostility delivered through perfectly deniable means. Then Zara's hands started shaking. It was a Tuesday morning in early winter. She was writing at her desk when the pen slipped twice in succession. She stared at her fingers. She pressed them flat against the surface of the desk and felt the faint but unmistakable tremor running beneath her skin. She sat very still for a long time. She did not call for Abena. She did not call Kai. She picked the pen back up and kept writing. By the time the doctors confirmed what Zara had already known in her body for 3 weeks, the winter had settled fully over Seoul. The illness was serious, not immediately life-threatening with proper management, but demanding of rest, of medication kept to a precise schedule, of the kind of stillness that does not come naturally to a woman who has spent her entire life in motion. Kai sat in the doctor's office and did not move for the duration of the diagnosis. He asked 4 questions. All 4 were precise and clinical and told the doctor everything about the kind of man sitting across from him. When they were back in the car, he took Zara's hand and held it without speaking for a long moment. Then he told her that whatever the illness required, the illness would have. What Kai did not fully account for in that moment was the speed with which news travels inside the walls of a family estate. Myung knew within 24 hours. Soo knew within 48. And Hana, who had a particular talent for extracting information from household staff through an elaborate system of small kindnesses and implied threats, knew the specific nature and severity of the diagnosis before Zara had finished unpacking the medications from the pharmacy bag. The illness was the opening Myung had been patient enough to wait for. She called a quiet meeting with Soo 2 days after the diagnosis became known within the household. Not in any of the main rooms. In the east sitting room, which had a fireplace and heavy curtains and sat at the end of the corridor furthest from the staff quarters, she told him that the situation had to be handled now, before Kai became fully entrenched in managing her care, before the illness created a sympathy bond that the organization's senior members would feel obligated to respect. Before Zara, whom Myung had never for a single day underestimated, found a way to convert her vulnerability into something strategic. Soo listened. He swirled his glass. He said the things he always said when his mother was asking him to do something he was morally uncomfortable with and strategically persuaded toward. He said she had a point. He said the timing was unfortunate, but perhaps necessary. He said that Kai would understand eventually. He did not say that he had already been in communication with people outside the family for reasons that had nothing to do with Zara. He kept his eyes on the fireplace and his voice steady and his glass never quite empty. Myung presented the plan with the precision of a woman who had been drafting it for considerably longer than 2 days. The approach would be gradual and deniable. First, the household staff assigned directly to Zara's care would be quietly reassigned. A shortage of personnel, an administrative adjustment, nobody could object. Zara would be left dependent on Hana's offered assistance, which Hana would provide with the careful inconsistency of someone who ensures that the person depending on her never fully can. Her medication schedule would be disrupted, not eliminated. Disrupted. Enough to slow her recovery, enough to extend her dependence. Enough to give Kai, who was about to walk into the most dangerous period his organization had faced in a decade, the impression that his wife's condition was worsening rather than improving. And then, when Kai was deep enough into the crisis that his attention could not be pulled back, the offer would be made to Zara directly. Leave with dignity, leave with resources, leave before this becomes something uglier than a quiet exit. Hana received her portion of the assignment with what Myung described afterward as enthusiasm. She moved into Zara's daily environment with a performance of solicitude so polished it was almost impressive. She brought tea at irregular intervals, sometimes an hour late, sometimes not at all. She rearranged Zara's medication twice, citing a concern about placement near moisture that she fabricated entirely. She dismissed Abena from Zara's room on 3 separate occasions with the smooth authority of a woman acting in the sick person's best interest. Abena went. Then she went directly to Zara and reported every single word with precise accuracy. I need to stop here for a moment and ask you something directly. Knowing what Myung just put in motion, knowing that Hana is in that room right now, do you think Kai would believe his own family could do this? Or is he the kind of man who already suspects more than he shows? Tell me what you think in the comments, because this story is about to take a turn that nobody in that family saw coming. Zara listened to Abena's reports with the composure of a woman confirming something she had already partially suspected. Rather than learning something new, she asked precise questions. She noted specific details. She thought carefully for long stretches and then gave Abena quiet, specific instructions that she repeated twice to make sure they were understood correctly. Then she lay back against her pillows and closed her eyes. Her hands were folded across the bedding. Her breathing was slow and measured. From the doorway, she looked like a woman surrendering to her illness. She was not surrendering to anything. What nobody in the Park family had correctly calculated was the particular kind of mind Zara possessed. She had grown up with nothing that could be called advantage. She had built every resource she owned through attention, through patience, and through the specific intelligence that comes to people who have spent their lives watching the powerful from rooms the powerful forgot to watch back. She had been inside this estate for 2 years. She had been reading every person in it from the first day, and 6 months ago, before any of this began, before the shaking hands and the winter diagnosis and Hana's tea delivered an hour late, she had started keeping records, not because she planned to use them at the time, but because she had been in enough rooms to know that rooms like this one do not stay quiet forever. The meeting was called for a Thursday night. Myung told the evening staff they were dismissed early, a personal family matter. She used the particular tone she had been using for 40 years to communicate that a thing was not a request. The staff cleared the estate's main floors by 9 in the evening. Kai was supposed to be across the city. He had a meeting with the senior council of his organization at 9:15, a meeting that had been on the schedule for a week. One of the 3 men present received a phone call 15 minutes before it was due to begin, made a brief apology, and rescheduled without explanation. Kai left the building at 9. He was back at the estate by 9:47. Nobody was supposed to know this. He came in through the side entrance, a habit from years of operating in buildings where the main entrance was also the observed entrance. He moved through the kitchen corridor and turned toward the east wing. He was heading for the private staircase that led directly to the upper floor where Zara's room was. He wanted to check on her, that was all, a detail nobody would have believed about him 2 years ago. Then he heard his mother's voice. It came from the east sitting room. The door was not fully closed, and Myung was speaking with the particular low precision of a woman who believed she was among people who already agreed with her. Kai stopped walking. Something moved through his chest. Not shock. Not yet. Something more primary than shock. Something that predates all learned responses. He recognized the tone. He had heard it before, never directed at someone he loved. He stepped sideways into the shadow of the heavy curtain panel against the wall, and he stood completely still. Myung was saying that the illness had created an ideal window. That a woman in Zara's position, isolated, physically dependent, without the daily protection of Kai's presence, was a woman who could be made to see reason. She used the phrase, see reason. Kai filed that phrase somewhere cold and permanent. Soo's voice followed, louder than his mother's, carrying the particular bluster of a man who needs volume to convince himself of what he is agreeing to. He said that Kai would thank them eventually, that they were protecting the family, that Zara, for all her apparent qualities, was a liability their enemies would eventually weaponize. He laughed at a specific moment in the conversation that Kai would never fully forgive. Not a nervous laugh, a comfortable one. Hana spoke last. Her voice was the quietest and the most precise. She provided operational detail, the medication that had already been disrupted, the staff reassignments already in progress, the contact she had established with someone outside the family who could begin preparing the financial terms of a settlement offer. She spoke about Zara with the administrative detachment of someone processing a personnel removal, a woman lying sick in the room above them, and Hana discussed her removal from this family's life with the tone of a woman closing a business account. Kai stood behind the curtain and did not move for the entire length of the conversation. His hand around the whiskey glass did not tremble. His breathing did not change. People who worked for Kai described this quality as the thing that frightened them most. Not his anger, his absolute physical stillness when he was processing something that would have broken a lesser man open in the room. He heard everything. He heard his mother describe Zara as a beautiful miscalculation. He heard his brother laugh. He heard Hana describe what she had already done to the medication schedule with the satisfied efficiency of someone reporting work completed. He heard them discuss the woman he loved with the collective casualness of people who had never for a single moment considered that she was a person with the full dimensions of a person. The meeting concluded. Chairs shifted. A glass was set down. Footsteps moved toward the corridor. Kai did not wait for them to find him. He moved back through the kitchen corridor with the silence of a man who has spent his entire adult life moving through spaces without announcing himself. He went out through the side entrance. He walked across the dark grounds of the estate to the outer stone steps that led up the side of the east wing to the roof terrace. He stood up there in the cold soul winter air for a long time. He thought about his father, who died telling him that emotion was destruction. He thought about the 17 years it had taken him to understand that what his father actually meant was that his father was afraid of his own emotions and had never found a better container for that fear than his son. He thought about the moment across the room at a charity event when a woman near a window had been watching a room full of performing people with the particular stillness of someone who needed nothing from any of them. He thought about what Hana had said about the medication schedule. He set the glass down on the stone ledge. He made a decision, not a loud decision, not a reactive decision. The kind of decision that settles into a man like a stone finding the floor of a lake. Quiet, permanent, immovable. He went back inside. He walked up the private staircase. He opened the door to Zara's room. The amber lamp on the bedside table was still on. Abena had left an hour earlier. The room was quiet. Zara was lying in the center of the large bed with her eyes wide open in the dark, looking at the ceiling with the complete stillness of a woman deep in thought. She turned her head when the door opened. She looked at him. Something passed between them in the silence of that room that neither of them put into words. He crossed to the bed. He sat on the edge of it. He took her hand. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew. What Kai did not know, sitting on the edge of that bed in the amber lamplight, was the full scope of what was in the room with them. Not just his love for her, not just her illness, not just the weight of what he had heard behind that curtain. What was also in the room was a locked panel beneath the rug in the dressing room, and what was inside that panel had been growing for the better part of 4 months. 3 nights after Kai's visit, when the house was asleep and Abena was keeping watch in the outer room, Zara rose from her bed. She crossed the bedroom. She entered the dressing room. She lifted the corner of the rug and opened the panel. Inside was a leather folder. Inside the folder were documents, photographs printed on plain paper, 2 USB drives, and a handwritten index of everything they contained, organized by date, by person, and by significance, in Zara's precise, clean handwriting. She had begun this collection 6 months ago, not because she knew she would need it, not because she had predicted any specific threat, but because she was Zara, and Zara had learned before she was 20 years old that the rooms with the nicest furniture are often the most dangerous ones, and that the people smiling at you across those tables will reach for your throat the moment you stop watching. She had been watching, she had been recording, she had been patient. The family thought they were protecting themselves by moving against a sick woman in a quiet room. They did not know the sick woman had been 3 moves ahead of them before any of this started. The midpoint of this story is not where the tables begin to turn. The midpoint is where the audience realizes the tables were never fully flat to begin with. The days that followed the overheard meeting were a study in the particular tension of a house full of people all performing ignorance of different things. Myung presided over breakfast the next morning with the serene authority of a woman whose plan was already in motion. She asked after Zara's health with the practiced warmth of someone who had been asking after it sincerely. She spoke with Kai about the organization's current difficulties with the focused attention of a mother genuinely invested in her son's well-being. She was, in every visible respect, the woman she had always performed being. She did not know that the man sitting across from her at that breakfast table had stood behind a curtain 7 hours earlier and heard every word she said. Kai was extraordinary at this. He had been trained by the nature of his work to function at full capacity beneath any surface pressure. He ate his breakfast. He answered his mother's questions with measured, appropriate concern. He mentioned that he planned to bring in additional medical consultants for Zara's care, which landed on Myung's composure like a pebble dropped from a height. He watched the slight adjustment in her expression with the patience of a man who is in absolutely no hurry. He did not confront her. He did not hint at what he knew. Kai had learned something that very few people in positions of power ever truly understand. The moment you reveal knowledge is the moment you lose the advantage of having it. He was going to hold this particular knowledge until the moment that holding it was worth the most, and that moment had not yet arrived. Soo was the most uncomfortable person in the building and the worst equipped to conceal it. He hovered. He made conversation at moments when conversation was not required. He brought Kai an unsolicited report on a property deal that afternoon, standing in the office doorway with a glass already in hand at 2 in the afternoon, talking for 12 unnecessary minutes while looking at a point 3 inches to the left of Kai's face. Kai let him talk. He watched his brother with the patient emptiness of a man cataloging what he was seeing without reacting to any of it. I need you to understand something about what Hana just did to that medication schedule. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not family conflict. This was a deliberate act against a sick woman who had done nothing but exist in a family that decided her existence was inconvenient. If you are as furious about this as I think you are right now, tell me in the comments, because Zara heard what they did, and she is not crying. She is building. Hana moved through the house with the confident precision of someone ahead of schedule. She delivered Zara's tea that morning 40 minutes late with a speech about how terribly busy things had been. She made 2 more personnel adjustments. She had a private conversation with the estate's main pharmacist that Abina overheard from the supply corridor and reported to Zara within the hour. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Kai's organization was beginning to tear at the seams. The rival syndicate had been moving quietly for months. 3 of his distribution networks had been compromised in ways that required an internal source, not a leak, a source. Someone with consistent access to scheduling and routing information who had been feeding it to the other side with the regularity of someone under a formal arrangement. Kai sat in his city office that evening with his senior security director and a wall covered in operational maps and said nothing for 40 minutes while he worked through what he was looking at. When he finally spoke, he named 4 people inside the organization who had the level of access required to do this kind of damage. He told his director to begin a quiet parallel investigation of all 4. No confrontation, no alerts, clean surveillance only. He did not put Soo's name on the initial list, not because he ruled him out, because he needed to be certain before he moved, and because the moment he became certain, what followed would not be investigation. It would be something else entirely. Something that required him to be ready rather than right. There is a difference. Kai understood that difference better than most living men. He drove back to the estate late. The house was dark and quiet. He went directly to Zara's room. She was awake, which was not unusual. The illness made sleep difficult. She was sitting up with a lamp on and a glass of water and the kind of expression that told him her mind had not stopped working for a single hour of the day. He sat down. She looked at him carefully. She said his name once, quietly, in the way that was also a question. He told her he was handling something at work, that it was almost resolved, that she should not worry. He told her this because it was the closest thing to true that he could say to her without opening the entire conversation he was not yet ready to open. She listened. She nodded. She took his hand. She did not tell him about the panel under the dressing room rug. Not yet. Because what she was building required one more piece, and she had just received word through Abena that the piece was almost within reach. On the 14th day of the 2nd week of winter, 3 weeks after Mayang's meeting in the East sitting room, Zara got out of bed at 6 in the morning before anyone in the household was awake and sat at her dressing table. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The illness had taken visible things from her. There were hollows beneath her cheekbones that had not been there in autumn. Her eyes carried fatigue in their depth like sediment. She had lost weight. She could feel the way her body was fighting something it was not yet winning, but her eyes were clear, and her mind was a machine that had not slowed down once. She called Abena at 6:15. Abena arrived in the room within 3 minutes. Zara gave her a sealed envelope. She told her to take a specific route through the East Market District on foot. She named a particular address, a private financial consulting office on a quiet block that she had identified 4 months ago through research conducted entirely on a personal device that no one in the estate knew she owned. She told Abena who to ask for. She told her what to say to identify herself, and she told her what to bring back. Abena asked no questions. She put the envelope inside her jacket. She left through the estate's secondary service entrance at 6:45 with the quiet, unremarkable movement of a woman running a routine errand. At 8 in the morning, Zara made a phone call. She had kept the number she needed inside the leather folder in the floor panel, written on a small card in her own handwriting. The man she called answered on the second ring. He was the kind of man who answers phones quickly because in his line of work, missed calls have consequences. He dealt in information. He dealt in the kind of formal, private verification services that exist for people who need documented proof of things that other people have been careful to avoid leaving documented proof of. They had spoken twice before. The groundwork was laid. This call was brief and specific, and it set in motion something that could not be unmoved once it started moving. Zara hung up the phone. She set it down on the bedside table. She leaned back against the headboard. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had settled in her expression. The determined edge was still there. It was simply joined now by a kind of quiet certainty that is rarer than determination. It is what determination looks like after it finds solid ground. That same morning, across the city, 3 things happened in the space of 4 hours that Kai did not connect to a single cause until later. A private financial audit firm initiated a formal inquiry into dormant accounts attached to a holding company registered to a Park family subsidiary, the kind of inquiry that, once initiated through a legitimate regulatory channel, cannot be quietly called off. The first notification arrived at a law office representing that holding company at 9:40 in the morning. At 10:15, a senior member of Kai's organization received an anonymous message delivered through a secure internal channel. The message contained the specific routing information that had been leaked to the rival syndicate over the preceding 3 months, along with the communication logs that showed precisely who had been sending it and to which contact. The information was presented with the clinical precision of someone who had organized it deliberately and completely. At 11, Kai sat in his city office and looked at what had been sent to his senior member. He read it 3 times. He set it down. He picked it up and read it a 4th time. His face moved through something that was not quite any single identifiable expression. It was the specific expression of a man simultaneously realizing 2 enormous things at exactly the same time. The first thing he was realizing was who had betrayed his organization. The evidence in front of him was clean and organized and irrefutable. He had been looking for a leak, and someone had just handed him the entire flood map. The second thing he was realizing, as he looked at the nature and quality and particular organization of the information presented to him, was that whoever had put this together had been working on it for months. Deliberately, methodically, with the patience and precision of someone who knew exactly what they were building toward. He thought about the woman lying in a room at the estate with hollows beneath her cheekbones and an expression that had always been the sharpest thing in any room she occupied. He sat back in his chair. Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. Stop right there, because before this story reaches its final moment, I want to know what you think is about to happen. Zara is about to walk into that room. The family is assembled. The evidence is ready. But do you think Kai is going to let her face them alone? Or do you think he already has something of his own prepared? Drop your prediction in the comments right now, because this ending is going to surprise you. 2 days before Zara moved, Myung came to her room. She knocked. She waited. She entered with the particular grace of a woman who owns every room she enters regardless of whose room it technically is. She was wearing her finest dark embroidered jacket. She had brought nothing with her. She did not need props. She was the offer. She sat down across from Zara's bed. She folded her hands in her lap, and she presented what she called a consideration, a generous financial arrangement, a private agreement. Zara would leave the marriage with full economic security and complete discretion guaranteed on both sides. No public statement would be required, no degrading narrative. Just a quiet exit, she said, conducted with all the dignity the situation could be made to accommodate. She spoke for 11 minutes. She used the word dignity 4 times. She used the word family 8 times. She used the phrase Kai's future 3 times, each time with a specific weight designed to suggest that Zara's departure was something Kai's future required, even if Kai himself could not yet see it clearly. She finished and sat back and looked at Zara with the expression of a woman presenting terms she considered by any reasonable measure fair. Zara was quiet for a very long time. The silence stretched long enough that Myung's perfect composure developed the hairline beginning of a question. Then Zara spoke. She said she appreciated the consideration. She said she needed 24 hours to think it through. She said it quietly and carefully, and with the tone of a woman giving the matter its due weight. Myung left the room with the measured satisfaction of a woman who believed she had already won. The door closed. Zara looked at the ceiling, then she looked at the dressing room door. Then she turned her head toward Abina, who was sitting in the corner chair and had not made a single sound during the entire 11 minutes. Abina raised an eyebrow. Zara shook her head slightly. Not yet. The timing mattered. It had to be right. It had to be in front of everyone. Tomorrow, Zara would rise. The morning Myung was expecting Zara's answer, the estate felt quieter than usual. Myung called the family together at 10. She framed it as a household matter, requiring all senior members to be present. She called Kai personally and told him she needed him at the estate by 10, that it was important, that it concerned family business requiring his presence as the family head. Kai listened. He said he would be there. He hung up and sat for a moment before reaching for his jacket. He already knew what the meeting was for. They gathered in the formal meeting room at 10:10. Myung at the far end of the table. Soo to her right, with a coffee in front of him that he was not drinking. Hana to her left, perfectly composed and dressed as if this were a social occasion. Kai seated midway down the right side of the table, his jacket on, his face giving nothing to anyone. The seat at the head of the table directly opposite Myung was empty. Myung was preparing to begin when the door of the meeting room opened. The room processed what it was looking at. Soo's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Hana went very still in the particular way of a person whose calculation has just encountered an unexpected variable. Myung's expression moved through the fastest sequence of adjustments in a single second that her face had performed in years. Kai did not move. He was already watching the door. Zara walked to the empty chair at the head of the table. She pulled it out. She sat down. She placed a leather folder on the table in front of her and folded her hands over it and looked at each person in the room in turn. No performance, no anger, no trembling. Simply the absolute composed authority of a woman who knows exactly how much weight is in her hands. Nobody spoke. She opened the folder. She began with Myung. She placed 3 documents on the table. They represented a decade of quiet financial manipulation. Park family funds quietly redirected through subsidiary accounts to support expenditures that served Myung's personal agenda rather than the organization's stated purpose. The documentation was clean, dated, and audited by an independent firm whose credentials were registered and verifiable. Zara named the amounts, she named the dates, she named the accounts. Myung sat completely still. For the first time in the memory of anyone present, she had nothing to say. Then Zara turned to Soo. She set down a different set of documents, communication logs, encrypted message extractions, dates, times, the contact name Soo had been using, and the specific operational intelligence that had been passed through to the rival syndicate across the preceding 6 months, including 3 instances of routing information past 10 hours before the distribution network compromises that had cost Kai's organization significantly and had nearly gotten 2 of his senior people killed. Soo's hand went to his collar, his mouth opened and nothing came out, and then Zara said the sentence that reconfigured everything. She said there was one more item. She looked at Kai when she said it. She held his gaze for a moment, then she turned back to the folder. She removed a single printed page and set it on the table. It was a communication transcript dated 6 weeks ago, between Soo and the rival syndicate's primary contact, containing a specific discussion about the logistics of a particular event, an event that had been framed publicly as a random security incident, an event in which Kai's personal vehicle had been targeted, the assassination attempt, the one Kai's security team had attributed to an external source, the one Kai had told Zara was close but handled, the one that had kept him at the city office 3 nights in a row while Zara lay sick in the estate and tried not to think too hard about what close but handled actually meant. Soo had arranged it. The room was completely silent. Kai looked at the page. He looked at Soo. Soo was looking at the table. He had not been able to meet Kai's eyes since Zara sat down. Hana, who had understood 3 minutes ago that the ground beneath this family had opened and swallowed everything she thought she owned, was sitting with both hands in her lap and an expression that had abandoned all of its performances. What was left underneath was something small and frightened, the face of a woman who had bet everything on the wrong outcome. If you have been watching this story from the beginning and you are feeling exactly what I think you are feeling right now, I need you to do one thing. Hit that subscribe button, because this channel tells stories exactly like this one every single week. Real drama, real stakes, real endings, and we are not finished yet. Zara closed the folder. She folded her hands on top of it. She looked at each of them again in the same measured sequence she had used when she entered the room. Then she looked at Kai, and this time she kept her eyes on his for a long moment. She did not need to say what came next. He was already standing. What happened in the formal meeting room of the park estate on that cold winter morning did not end in the way any of the people who entered it had expected. It ended in the only way that was ever honest. Kai dismissed Soo from the organization that morning, formally, in front of the family, in the specific language of the organization that made the dismissal absolute and irrevocable. He used no raised voice. He needed none. He told Soo what he knew and what the documentation confirmed and what would follow. Soo did not argue. Men who have been completely seen rarely do. Hana left the estate that afternoon with 2 bags, a legal agreement signed in a room with Kai's lawyer present, and an understanding of the specific consequences that would follow any deviation from the terms of her exit. Myung was the most difficult. She is still the most difficult. She did not leave the estate. She did not try to. She sat in the east sitting room for most of that day in the chair nearest the fireplace, in the room where she had held her careful meeting and believed herself victorious, and she sat with the full weight of what she had built and what it had cost her. Kai went to her that evening. They spoke for a long time behind a closed door. Nobody knows exactly what was said. What is known is that when that door opened, Myung walked past the hallway without stopping and went directly up the stairs. And the next morning she asked to see Zara. What Zara said to Myung in that room is something only Abena partially overheard and has never fully disclosed. What Abena has said is that it was not vengeful, that Zara did not need revenge to be Zara, that she said what she said, and Myung sat in the chair by the window and listened, and when she left, she was different than when she came in. Not fixed, different. The beginning of something that takes far longer to become what it is trying to become. This story right here, this moment, is the kind of thing I wish more people could see. Not just the part where the tables turned, but this part, because strength without cruelty is rarer and more powerful than anything else in a room. If someone in your life needs to see this story today, share this video with them right now. Zara's recovery was slow. The illness did not resolve immediately because it never does, but it changed. Something in her body responded to the shift in the atmosphere of the house the way plants respond to a change in season. Abena said she noticed it first in the way Zara slept. More completely, more fully. The deep, unconscious rest of a person whose body finally trusted the room it was in. Kai changed too. The things he learned in the weeks that followed the meeting changed his understanding of his own life with a thoroughness that quiet changes things. He came home earlier. He sat longer. He talked to Zara in ways he had previously reserved for analysis and strategy, except now the subject was the two of them and what they were building together and what they both wanted it to be. There is something worth saying about what Zara did and how she did it. She did not burn the house down. She could have. The documentation she held in that leather folder was sufficient to end more than she ended. She was precise, surgical. She removed the specific things that were causing specific damage. She left intact the things that could still grow. That is not the strategy of someone consumed by revenge. That is the strategy of someone who intends to remain in the room long after the fight is over. They were still in the room, both of them, choosing it. Every morning, the family she married into spent 2 years deciding what she was and was not capable of. They looked at her illness and saw an exit. They looked at her silence and heard surrender. They looked at the distance between where she came from and where she had arrived and called it a miscalculation. They were wrong about all of it. The most dangerous woman in any room is not the one making the most noise. She is the one in the corner, burning with fever and building something none of you have thought to check for. Zara checked for everything.